She spent 30 years pouring herself into other people's children. She raised 2 of her own after burying the man she loved. She earned her doctorate as a single mother, launched programs for kids who had nothing, and built a life that most people only dream about.
There were a lot of people who had a motive to attack and ultimately kill Terresa Keel.
In this true crime documentary, we uncovered the horrifying case of Terresa Keel.
This wouldn't be anything she wouldn't give to her students, her colleagues, her family. You know, I worked across the hall for 30 years.
It's so sad that she's gone and justice has to be served. I mean, there's so much hurt.
Loved ones and supporters in court describing Mrs. Keel as a devoted educator, an assistant principal and teacher for decades in the Malvern School District.
And on a cold December night in 2016, someone who knew exactly where she'd be and exactly when she would arrive was waiting in the dark. The weapon was a metal barbell. The attack lasted seconds, but the suffering it caused would stretch for nearly 2 years.
Now at 5 o'clock, consequences for a barbaric and deadly barbell beating on Long Island. The victim struck several times in the head with a metal barbell in December of 2016. For 2 years, she lived in a vegetative state from her severe brain injury. And then on Saturday, she died.
Nassau County, New York, sits at the edge of Long Island, where the city's restless energy gives way to quiet neighborhoods, oceanfront boardwalks, and the kind of tree-lined streets where neighbors still wave hello. It's the kind of place where people put down roots, where a career teacher could spend 30 years in the same district and never run out of students who remembered her name. Terresa Keel was one of those people. She grew up in Queens, came to age in New York City's relentless rhythm, and eventually settled in Nassau County, where she joined the Malvern School District as a classroom teacher. Over the next 30 years, she climbed steadily through the ranks, from teacher to mentor to assistant principal, earning a reputation that extended far beyond any job title. Ask anyone who crossed her path, and you'd hear the same things: that she remembered your name years later, that she stayed late, came in early, and pushed students to believe in themselves long after the bell had rung, that there was no version of a child she gave up on. Along the way, she built a family of her own. She married David Keel, a well-regarded dentist in Glen Cove, and together they created what looked, from the outside, like a picture-perfect home. 2 children, a son named Vincent and a daughter named Francesca. A comfortable life rooted in community, ambition, and love. But in 2004, that picture shattered. David Keel died suddenly, leaving Terresa alone with a 13-year-old boy and a 7-year-old girl. The grief was enormous. The weight of raising 2 children solo while holding down a demanding career would have broken many people. Terresa didn't break. She went back to school while working full-time and earned her doctorate. She launched a tutoring program for underprivileged children, turning her personal pain into fuel for helping others. She held her family together with the same quiet ferocity she brought to everything else in her life. Vincent grew up to be a gifted tennis player before channeling his competitive instincts into tech, specifically mobile app development. Francesca excelled academically, graduated high school in 2015, and enrolled in community college with her mother's full encouragement. By 2016, Terresa could finally exhale. Her children were adults, her work was fulfilling. The storm of her husband's death had long since passed. She had no idea an entirely different storm was already forming, and this one had a face she would have recognized. It was 10:30 p.m. on December 4th, 2016. Franklin Cosma was wrapping up a jog along Long Beach's famous 2-mile oceanfront boardwalk, pausing near New York Avenue to catch his breath. The night was still, the kind of quiet that settles over a neighborhood when most people have already gone home. That's when he noticed her, a woman crossing the street toward the entrance of a small apartment building. She stepped through the glass doors into the partially covered lobby, and then, from somewhere behind her, a shadow moved. A man, tall, moving fast. He slipped in right behind her, and then the screaming started. Franklin didn't hesitate. He sprinted toward the building, and through the glass wall he could see everything. The attacker was gripping a large, heavy object, swinging it with terrifying force again and again at the woman's head. Franklin burst through the doors. The moment he did, the attacker's eyes snapped toward Franklin. For a fraction of a second, everything froze. Then the attacker dropped the weapon and ran, disappearing through a side exit into the darkness. Franklin had a split-second decision. He chose the woman. He ran to her, finding her crumpled on the lobby floor, barely conscious, her head and face bearing the full brutality of what had just happened. Other residents were already emerging from their apartments. Franklin shouted for someone to call 911, then took off after the fleeing figure. It was too late. The attacker had a 20-second head start, and by the time Franklin reached the alleyway, there was nothing but shadows. When he returned, the block was already flooded with emergency lights. Paramedics worked frantically as detectives sealed off the scene. And it was there, standing in the cold December air surrounded by flashing lights, that Franklin Cosma learned the name of the woman he had tried to save. Terresa Keel, 54 years old, beloved teacher, long-time resident of this very building. She was alive, barely, as they rushed her to North Shore Manhasset Hospital. Whether she would stay that way, no one could say. The crime scene told a brutal story even before the forensic team finished their work. Scattered across the lobby floor were the contents of Teresa's purse, her wallet, her keys, a brown paper takeout bag that had burst open when she fell, spilling her dinner across the tile. Nothing was missing. Not a single item had been taken. This wasn't robbery. Whoever had done this didn't want her money. They wanted her. Near the pool of blood where Teresa had collapsed, investigators found a deep dent in the wall, smeared with blood, marking the moment the weapon had missed her and struck the surface instead. The force required to leave that kind of damage told detectives everything they needed to know about the intent behind the attack. Franklin gave detectives his statement, describing the attacker as a tall man, 6'3", maybe 6'4", wearing a hooded jacket, a winter cap, and a face covering. He couldn't make out any features, but he could estimate the build: broad, muscular, moving with purpose. Canine units fanned out through the surrounding blocks. Forensic specialists processed the lobby, and then, following the path Franklin had traced during his chase, officers made a discovery that cracked the evidence wide open. On top of a garbage bin behind a fenced alleyway, they found it: a metal dumbbell ball, coated in blood. It was sent immediately to the lab, and surveillance footage from the surrounding blocks filled in the rest of the picture, confirming Franklin's account moment by moment and revealing one additional detail that shifted the entire investigation. The suspect, captured on camera as he fled, was carrying a dark gym bag. This wasn't impulsive. Somebody had planned this. Somebody had shown up prepared.
At North Shore Manhasset Hospital, detectives found two people at Teresa's bedside: her brother Michael and her 24-year-old son Vincent, who had rushed there the moment a neighbor called. Vincent told investigators he and his mother had shared dinner earlier that evening. Everything had been normal. They laughed, they talked. He had no idea it would be the last time. Investigators asked the question that had been forming since they arrived: where was his sister, Francesca? Vincent had tried calling her multiple times, no answer, and yet he wasn't surprised. That, he said, had become her pattern lately. The detectives leaned in. It turned out that earlier in the year, the Keel family had fractured along a line no one had seen coming. Francesca had been secretly dating her brother's closest friend, a 26-year-old corrections officer named Ralph Kepler, for over a year. She was 19 when it began. He was 7 years older. When Vincent and Teresa found out, the fallout was swift and bitter. Teresa strongly disapproved of the relationship. Francesca refused to end it, and eventually she moved into Ralph's home, cutting herself off from the family she had grown up in. At first glance, it seemed like a painful but ordinary family conflict, but the story had layers that investigators hadn't reached yet. Ralph Kepler wasn't just Francesca's boyfriend. He had once been Vincent's business partner. When Vincent began developing a college-focused dating app, Ralph expressed interest. He believed in the concept. Enough, in fact, to convince his own family to invest. The total they put in, roughly $130,000. For a while, things moved forward. Then the project stalled. Deadlines passed, communication broke down, and when Ralph pushed for answers, he got silence. By the time the secret relationship came to light and the friendship collapsed, so had the business, and with it, Ralph Kepler's trust in everyone connected to it. When detectives sat down with Ralph and Francesca at their home in Lindbrook that night, they both had the same story. They'd been home all evening wrapping Christmas gifts and watching football. Ralph said the last time he'd left the house was 11 that morning to buy a lottery ticket. And Francesca had something more than a story. She had proof. Time-stamped photos on her phone and social media showing the two of them at home, together, between 10:24 and 10:41 p.m., the exact window of the attack. On paper, their alibi was airtight. Detectives cleared them and moved on. But the case nagged, and the more they dug, the stranger things began to look. Investigators widened their net. They interviewed every investor connected to Vincent's app. They ran background checks on recently released offenders. They looked at anyone in the area with a violent history. Nothing fit. And then, Teresa's phone records came back from analysis. The name at the top of the list, the contact she'd exchanged the most messages with in the weeks before the attack, and the one those messages had been most hostile with, was Ralph Kepler. Not an anonymous threat, not a stranger, the boyfriend of her own daughter. In those messages, Ralph had sent a sustained barrage of threatening, obsessive communications, texts, emails, images. He accused Teresa of stealing from him, of lying, of helping Vincent misuse investor funds for personal gain. The tone was not frustrated, it was enraged. Investigators went back to the surveillance footage. They watched again as the tall, hooded figure followed Teresa into her building. They watched his gait, his posture, the width of his shoulders, the way he carried himself. And then they compared it to Ralph Kepler. The art was almost exact. Suspicion wasn't evidence. To bring Ralph down, detectives needed something concrete, something that could pierce through the wall of time-stamped photos and perfectly synchronized stories. The threatening messages gave investigators enough to secure search warrants for both Ralph's and Francesca's complete phone records. What they found in Francesca's records stopped them cold. Approximately 2 weeks before the attack, she had dialed a toll-free number tied to a company called Spias, a GPS tracking device provider. The purchase had been made on her credit card. The item, a compact, portable GPS tracker. Detectives contacted Spias directly and pulled the device's location logs. The tracker had been moving on a fixed circuit, back and forth between 2 locations, over and over. Teresa Keel's apartment and the school where she worked. Someone had placed that device on Teresa's car and had been watching her. Every departure, every arrival, every stop along the way, recorded and transmitted in real time. A warrant for Francesca's email account revealed what happened to all of that data. Her inbox was full of automated GPS alerts, each one time-stamped, each one logging her mother's location with quiet precision. Every time Teresa left home, Francesca knew. The net pulled tighter still. Phone location data for both Ralph and Francesca showed a recurring pattern in the days leading up to December 4th, their devices appearing at the same locations as the tracker at regular intervals, like clockwork. Investigators understood what they were seeing. They had been sneaking out together to replace the tracker's batteries, keeping the surveillance operation alive for months. And then came the detail that demolished the alibi entirely. Just minutes after the attack on the night of December 4th, a call was placed from Francesca's phone to a Long Beach taxi company. The call originated from Lindbrook, where the couple lived.
She hadn't been panicking over a missing mother. She had been arranging her boyfriend's escape. Police tracked the cab company's logs and found the driver who'd worked that night. She remembered the passenger vividly. A large man who had climbed into the far back seat, hunched low, keeping his face angled away. He handed her a $20 bill for a $5 fare and told her to keep the change. He asked to be taken to a nearby train station. Security footage from both the pickup point and the station confirmed the rest. It was the same man Franklin Cosma had chased from the lobby. The same silhouette on every camera between the crime scene and the cab, the same build, the same jacket. Ralph Kepler. On January 24, 2018, more than a year after the attack, Ralph Kepler was arrested. In one of the more striking ironies of the case, officers took him into custody while he was on duty at Rikers Island, where he worked as a corrections officer. He was charged with second-degree attempted murder. He said nothing, but the evidence spoke for him. A court-ordered DNA swab matched the sample recovered from the blood-stained dumbbell bar found behind the alleyway. The blood on the bar belonged to Terresa Keel. The DNA on the bar belonged to Ralph Kepler. Then came November 10, 2018. After nearly 2 years in a vegetative state, blind in one eye, unable to communicate, kept alive by machines, Terresa Keel died. The charge against Ralph was immediately upgraded to second-degree murder, and now, for the first time, prosecutors turned their full attention to Francesca. The search warrant for her internet history produced 2 searches that left no room for ambiguity. In the days surrounding the attack, Francesca had searched how reliable is DNA evidence, how to kill someone and get away with it, weakest part of the skull. On November 10, 2018, the same day her mother passed, Francesca Keel was arrested and charged with murder. Her attorney called the arrest a shock, said her client would vehemently deny the allegations.
The victim's daughter and her boyfriend are now charged with murder. Eyewitness News reporter NJ Burkett is live at Hempstead with the story. NJ?
Well, detectives say it was all about money and a business venture that went south. A woman is allegedly murdered as payback, and the suspects, the woman's daughter and the daughter's boyfriend.
Detectives say 21-year-old Francesca Keel plotted the cold-blooded murder of her own mother, conspiring with her 27-year-old boyfriend, Ralph Kepler, a former Rikers Island correction officer, accused of using a barbell to shatter the skull of Terresa Keel, a beating prosecutors described as barbaric.
She was hit several times about the head with a barbell. It's caused severe injuries to her head and a loss of her right eye.
It happened in December of 2016, outside her apartment in Long Beach, Long Island. Mrs. Keel survived for nearly 2 years, partially blind and comatose, until she died this weekend. Kepler was already facing assault charges. Francesca Keel had not been charged until today. Her lawyer says the arrest came as a shock.
Francesca, unfortunately, has to bury her mother while also fighting these allegations, which she obviously vehemently denies.
At the heart of the case, legal motions and a lawsuit. Kepler was suing Terresa Keel over a dating app they were developing and money he and his family invested that the victim allegedly squandered. Mark Gann is Kepler's attorney.
I believe that there are others that had motives to attack her. We've investigated some of those. I can't get into detail right now, but I fully believe that Ralph is innocent of these charges, and I expect to be able to prove that in court.
But Terresa Keel's civil attorney says he lived in fear of Ralph Kepler and even carried a panic button.
The Nassau County Police told me that I was in danger, and they gave me some security devices so that I could protect myself and my family.
Well, the civil lawsuit is on hold tonight in light of the new criminal charges. I'm told the couple were still living together.
As prosecutors assembled the full picture of the conspiracy, the sequence became devastatingly clear. Ralph and Francesca had obtained the GPS tracker weeks in advance. They had monitored Teresa's movements with surgical patience, learning her schedule, mapping her habits. In the evening of December 4th, when Francesca received an alert showing her mother leaving for dinner, Ralph drove to Long Beach and waited. When Teresa returned, he was already inside. While Ralph carried out the assault in the lobby, Francesca worked the alibi from home. Investigators theorized that the time-stamped photos had been staged earlier that evening, deleted before 10:30 p.m., then reposted after the fact to create a false digital footprint. A burner phone, they suspected, had been used to coordinate the escape, so the call to the taxi company couldn't be traced back to either of them. Almost every piece of the plan held, until Franklin Cosma happened to be jogging past that night. In the end, neither Ralph nor Francesca went to trial. Ralph Kepler pled guilty to second-degree murder, conspiracy, and weapons possession. In June 2020, he was sentenced to 22 years to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole until 2040, when he will be 50 years old. Francesca Keel pled guilty to first-degree manslaughter. She received 13 years. She may be eligible for parole in 2029. In courtrooms full of people who had once sat in Teresa's classroom, who had watched her raise her children after losing her husband, who had seen her build something meaningful out of hardship, they struggled to find language for what had happened. A woman who spent her life investing in others had been betrayed by the one person she had given everything to, her own daughter. There is no clean ending to a story like this, no resolution that makes the loss make sense. Teresa Keel dedicated 30 years to helping children find their way. She survived widowhood, she earned her doctorate, she kept showing up. She deserved better than the darkness that found her in that lobby. She deserved everything she had worked so hard to give.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true crime documentaries. See you in the next video.